Hey there, listeners. Welcome to Espresso English, the podcast where we dive into thrilling tales and then break them down to help you master English vocabulary and grammar. I'm Lily, your friendly host and storytelling enthusiast.
And I'm Brad, your co-host and language geek. I'm here to make sure we unpack all the tricky words and grammar points that might trip you up.
Today, we've got a story that's a little bit spooky, a little bit suspenseful, and a whole lot of fun to analyze. It's about a teenager home alone for the first time, and let's just say, things don't go as planned.
Right. As we go through the story, we'll be hitting pause to explain key vocabulary and grammar points. Think of it as a fun, interactive way to boost your English skills while enjoying a great story.
So grab your headphones, settle in, and let's get started. Ready, Brad?
Absolutely, Lily. Let's turn this suspenseful tale into a learning adventure.
It was a night like any other, or so I thought. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. After finishing my homework, I prepared to crawl into bed, feeling the familiar comfort of my room on the second floor. The window offered a view of the still street below, illuminated only by the flickering light of a street lamp. The house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the usual bustle. With my parents away on a weekend trip, being home alone at 17 wasn't a big deal. Or so I convinced myself. The idea of having the house to myself, to watch whatever I wanted on TV, and stay up late, had felt like a small taste of freedom.
All right, let's dive into the first part of our story. Brad, why don't you start us off with some vocabulary?
Sure thing, Lily. Let's start with the phrase, a night like any other. This is a common expression used to suggest that something is ordinary or typical. It sets up the story by making it seem like everything is normal, at least at first.
Exactly. And the next phrase, the moon hung low in the sky, is a beautiful example of descriptive language. The verb hung here doesn't mean that the moon is literally hanging like an object, but rather it's a figurative way to describe its position. It gives the scene a calm, almost serene feeling, don't you think?
Definitely. And let's talk about casting a silvery glow. The word casting here is used to describe how light spreads over an area. Silvery glow is a poetic way to describe the moonlight. It adds to the atmosphere, making the night feel almost magical.
Good point, Brad. Now let's move to the sentence. The house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the usual bustle. Here, eerily means something that's strange or unsettling. It hints that something might be off. And stark contrast is a great phrase that means there's a strong difference between two things. In this case, the quietness and the usual activity.
Right. And usual bustle refers to the everyday noise and activity of a busy household. Bustle is a noun that describes lively or noisy movement. So, this part of the sentence tells us that the house is unusually quiet compared to how it normally is when the family is home.
Let's not forget the phrase, a small taste of freedom. This is a metaphor. A taste. Here doesn't mean literal tasting. Instead, it's used to describe experiencing a little bit of something. The character is excited about being home alone and sees it as a chance to enjoy some freedom.
Great catch, Lily. And now, let's touch on some grammar. Notice the use of past continuous tense in I was feeling the familiar comfort of my room. The past continuous tense, was feeling, is used to describe an ongoing action that was happening at a specific time in the past. It's a subtle way to show that the character was in the process of relaxing and feeling at ease.
That's a great point. And the sentence, the window offered a view of the still street below, uses the verb offered to describe what the window allows you to see. It's a simple past tense verb that gives us a sense of what the character is observing in that moment.
Lastly, there's an important contrastive conjunction in the phrase, being home alone at 17 wasn't a big deal, or so I convinced myself. The phrase, or so, is a way to introduce doubt or suggest that the character is trying to reassure themselves even if they might actually feel uncertain.
Perfectly explained, Brad. So, listeners, as you can see, even in just a few sentences, there's a lot of rich language and grammar to explore. Keep these points in mind as we continue with the story. It's all about making those connections between what you read and how you can use the language yourself.
Absolutely. We're just getting started, so stick around for more insights as we go deeper into the story.
After brushing my teeth and changing into my favorite pajamas, I slipped under the warm covers. The soft hum of the air conditioner was the only sound, lulling me into a sense of calm. I turned off the bedside lamp, leaving the room in darkness except for the faint light from my window. A final glance at my phone showed 11:45 p.m. before I placed it on the nightstand and settled in to sleep. As I drifted closer to sleep, a faint noise caught my attention. It was soft at first, like the creaking of old floorboards. My eyes snapped open, and I lay still, straining to listen. Probably just the house settling, I reassured myself, but then I heard it again. A louder, unmistakable creak coming from downstairs.
All right, let's dive into the vocabulary and grammar of this part of the story. Brad, why don't we start with some of the key vocabulary?
Great idea, Lily. Let's begin with the phrase, slipped under the warm covers. Here, slipped is a verb that means to move smoothly or quietly into a position. It gives a sense of ease and comfort, like when you slide into bed. Covers refers to the blankets or sheets on the bed.
Right. Next, we have the word lulling. In the soft hum of the air conditioner was the only sound, lulling me into a sense of calm. Lulling means to soothe or calm someone, often to the point of making them sleepy. It's a nice word to describe how gentle sounds can make you feel relaxed.
Exactly. Then we have a final glance. Glance is a quick look at something. So, a final glance suggests that the character looked at their phone one last time before putting it away. This word is often used when you quickly check something without paying full attention.
Good point. Now, let's talk about some of the grammar here. Notice the use of past continuous tense in "as I drifted closer to sleep." Drifted is in the past continuous tense, which is used to describe actions that were in progress at a specific time in the past. It helps set the scene by showing that the action of drifting into sleep was happening over a period of time.
That's right. And did you catch the use of caught my attention? This is an example of a phrasal verb. Phrasal verbs are verbs combined with a preposition or adverb, and they often have meanings different from the individual words. Here, caught means grabbed or attracted. So, caught my attention means something made the narrator notice it.
Exactly. And another phrasal verb is settling, as in probably just the house settling. Here, settling refers to the house making creaking sounds as it adjusts or shifts slightly, which is common in old houses.
Let's also look at the sentence, I lay still, straining to listen. The word straining means to make a great effort, usually physically or mentally. In this context, it means the narrator is trying very hard to listen carefully. The use of still as an adjective here emphasizes the narrator's motionlessness, creating a sense of tension.
And finally, we have the word unmistakable in a louder, unmistakable creak. Unmistakable means something that is clear and cannot be mistaken for anything else. It highlights that the sound was so distinct that the narrator couldn't ignore it.
So, to sum up, this passage is packed with descriptive language that not only sets the scene, but also builds tension. By using carefully chosen vocabulary and grammar, the writer helps us feel the narrator's growing sense of unease.
Exactly. And that's what makes storytelling so powerful. It's all about the details. We hope this breakdown helps you understand how these words and phrases work together to create that suspenseful atmosphere.
My heart began to race. I tried to rationalize the sound, thinking it could be the wind or the plumbing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sound had come from inside the house. I got out of bed as quietly as possible, tiptoeing to the door and opening it just a crack. The hallway was dark and quiet, everything appearing normal. But the eerie silence felt foreboding. I hesitated, unsure whether to investigate or retreat back to bed. Curiosity, tinged with fear, won out. I needed to know what was making that noise. Grabbing my phone, I moved silently down the hall, avoiding the creaky spots in the floor. At the top of the stairs, I paused, listening intently. The noise came again, a shuffle, followed by a soft clinking sound, like metal being moved. My heart skipped a beat. Someone was definitely in the house.
All right, listeners, let's dive into the next part of our story. This section is packed with vivid descriptions and some interesting vocabulary and grammar that we can learn from. Let's break it down together, shall we, Brad?
Absolutely, Lily. Let's start with the phrase, "My heart began to race." This is a great example of a common idiom used to describe the physical reaction to fear or excitement. The verb began here is the past tense of begin, signaling that this is something that happened in the past.
Right, and it's also worth noting that race is used metaphorically. Normally, race means to compete in speed, but here it's describing the quickening of the heartbeat, which adds to the suspense of the moment.
Exactly. Now, moving on to the sentence. I tried to rationalize the sound, thinking it could be the wind or the plumbing. The word rationalize is a verb that means to try to explain or justify something logically, even if it doesn't make much sense. Here, it's used to show the character's attempt to calm themselves by finding a logical explanation for the noise.
Good point, Brad. And notice how thinking it could be the wind or the plumbing uses could be. This modal verb could indicates possibility. The character isn't sure, but they're considering different options.
Right. And then we have, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. This phrase, deep down, is an idiomatic expression that means in the most honest or sincere part of oneself. It emphasizes that, despite trying to rationalize, the character truly knows something is wrong.
That's a great observation, Brad. Moving on. The sound had come from inside the house. This sentence uses the past perfect tense, had come, to indicate that the sound occurred before another action in the past, which is important for understanding the sequence of events.
Exactly. Next up, I got out of bed as quietly as possible, tiptoeing to the door and opening it just a crack. Here, tiptoeing is a verb form that describes walking on the tips of your toes to avoid making noise. The phrase just a crack is a common expression that means opening something only a very small amount, adding to the tension.
And that's a great use of descriptive language to create suspense. Now, the sentence. The hallway was dark and quiet, everything appearing normal. Uses a gerund form, appearing, to describe how things seemed. This form helps paint a picture in the reader's mind.
Absolutely, Lily. Now, but the eerie silence felt foreboding. Let's focus on eerie and foreboding. Eerie is an adjective meaning strange and frightening, and foreboding is a noun, meaning a feeling that something bad is going to happen. Together, they create a sense of dread.
Good catch, Brad. Next. I hesitated, unsure whether to investigate or retreat back to bed. The verb hesitated means to pause before doing something, usually due to uncertainty or fear. The word whether introduces two options here, investigate or retreat, making the reader feel the character's indecision.
Exactly. And in curiosity, tinged with fear, won out. Tinged means slightly colored or affected by something. It shows how curiosity was present, but influenced by fear. Won out is a phrasal verb meaning to succeed or prevail, showing that curiosity was stronger than fear.
Nice explanation, Brad. Moving on. Grabbing my phone, I moved silently down the hall, avoiding the creaky spots in the floor. The use of grabbing and moving as present participles creates a sense of ongoing action, keeping the reader engaged in the moment.
Yes, and the phrase avoiding the creaky spots uses avoiding, another gerund, to describe the careful actions taken. Creaky is an adjective describing something that makes a sharp, high-pitched sound when moved or stepped on, which adds to the suspense.
Great points, Brad. Finally, at the top of the stairs, I paused, listening intently. The adverb intently describes how the character is listening with full attention, heightening the tension. And the noise came again, a shuffle, followed by a soft clinking sound like metal being moved, uses onomatopoeia with shuffle and clinking to make the scene more vivid.
Exactly, Lily. And when the character says, "My heart skipped a beat," someone was definitely in the house. It's another idiom that expresses intense fear or shock. It ties up this part of the story with a strong emotional impact, keeping the reader or listener on edge.
That was a fantastic breakdown, Brad. We hope you all found that helpful. Stick around as we continue to explore more vocabulary and grammar points in the next part of our story.
Can't wait. Stay tuned, everyone.
Crouching low, I peered over the banister into the living room. It was dark, but a faint light glowed from the kitchen. Panic gripped me as I considered the possibilities. A burglar? A random intruder? My thoughts spiraled as I tried to figure out what to do. My phone was in my hand, but turning it on could give me away. I needed to get out of the house and call the police. Taking a deep breath, I started down the stairs, moving slowly to avoid making any noise. The old house amplified every creak, but I knew where to step. At the bottom, I crouched low and moved toward the kitchen. The light was brighter, and I could see a figure rummaging through the drawers. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure the intruder would hear it. As I debated my next move, the intruder suddenly stopped and began moving toward the living room. Panic surged through me. I had to do something. My eyes landed on a heavy ceramic vase on the table beside me. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. Gripping it tightly, I tensed, ready to act.
All right, listeners, we're diving into a particularly tense part of the story. Let's break it down, starting with some of the key vocabulary and phrases. Brad, what jumps out at you?
There's a lot to unpack here, Lily. Let's start with the word crouching. When the narrator says, "Crouching low, I peered over the banister." Crouching means to bend your knees and lower your body close to the ground. It's often used when you want to move quietly or stay hidden. It's a great word to add to your vocabulary when describing sneaky or cautious movements.
Right. And peered is another interesting word. To peer means to look closely or carefully at something, especially when you're trying to see something that's difficult to see, like peering into the darkness or through a small opening. It adds a sense of suspense because the character is clearly being cautious.
Exactly. Then we have banister, which is the handrail on the side of a staircase. So, when the narrator peers over the banister, they're looking down from the top of the stairs. It's a great visual detail that adds to the tension of the scene.
Speaking of tension, let's talk about panic gripped me. This is a powerful way to describe how intense fear takes hold of someone. Gripped. Here is used metaphorically to mean that the panic was so strong, it felt like it was physically holding the narrator in place. Very vivid imagery.
That's a great point, Lily. Another phrase that caught my attention is, "My thoughts spiraled." This means that the narrator's thoughts started to go out of control, spinning into all kinds of scenarios. Spiraled is a verb that conveys the idea of losing control, which really fits the chaotic emotions in this moment.
And we see that confusion and fear continue with, "As I debated my next move." Here, debated means the narrator was considering different options or choices. It shows the internal struggle and hesitation. Now, Brad, how about some of the grammar points in this passage?
Great idea. One important point here is the use of but as a conjunction to show contrast. For example, it was dark, but a faint light glowed from the kitchen. The word but is connecting two contrasting ideas, the darkness and the faint light. It's a simple yet effective way to build contrast in a sentence.
Another cool grammar point is the structure. I started down the stairs, moving slowly. Here, moving slowly is a present participle phrase that describes how the narrator started down the stairs. It adds more detail to the action without needing a whole new sentence.
And finally, let's look at "I had to do something." This is an example of using the modal verb had to express necessity or obligation.
Absolutely, Brad. Those little grammar points really bring the action and emotion to life. So listeners, keep these vocabulary words and grammar tips in mind as we continue with the story. They'll help you not only understand the language better, but also appreciate the storytelling on a deeper level.
That's the goal. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the suspense and uncover more language gems along the way.
Just as the intruder rounded the corner, I leaped up and swung the vase with all my strength. The vase smashed into the intruder's arm with a sickening thud. They let out a grunt of pain, dropping what they were holding. The vase shattered on the floor as I bolted for the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, but finally, I managed to yank the door open and dash outside. I ran to my neighbor's house, dialing 911 as I went. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline as I gasped out my situation. Within minutes, the flashing lights of police cars appeared, bringing with them a wave of relief. The officers moved swiftly, entering my house and emerging with the intruder in handcuffs. Watching from the safety of my neighbor's porch, I felt a mix of fear and relief. The intruder was caught, and I was safe. The experience left me shaken, but I learned something valuable that night. Even in the face of fear, I had the strength to protect myself. With the intruder behind bars and a new security system installed, life slowly returned to normal. The fear lingered for a while, but I knew that if anything like this happened again, I would be ready.
All right, everyone, let's dive into the vocabulary and grammar in this action-packed part of the story. It's full of vivid language and some powerful emotions. Brad, want to kick things off?
Absolutely, Lily. Let's start with the word leapt. This is the past tense of leap, which means to jump or spring forward quickly. It's a great verb choice here because it really captures that sudden, urgent movement when the character springs into action.
Right. And did you notice the phrase, with all my strength? This is an example of an adverbial phrase that tells us how the action of swinging the vase was done. It emphasizes the effort and force behind the action, making the scene even more intense.
Good point. Another word to look at is smashed. This verb describes something breaking or shattering with force. Here, it's used to show the impact of the vase hitting the intruder's arm. Notice how it's followed by a sickening thud. The word thud is onomatopoeic. It sounds like what it describes, which helps us really hear the noise in our minds.
Exactly. And moving on to fumbled. This verb means to do something clumsily or with difficulty. It's perfect here because it conveys the panic and fear the character feels as they struggle with the lock. It makes the scene more relatable. Who wouldn't be shaking in that situation?
Definitely. Now let's talk about the grammar here. Take the sentence. I managed to yank the door open and dash outside. The structure managed to plus verb indicates that the character successfully did something difficult. It's a useful structure to express overcoming a challenge. And then dash. This verb means to run quickly and suddenly, adding to the sense of urgency.
Great points, Brad. Another thing to notice is the phrase, within minutes. This is a time expression showing that something happened very quickly after something else. It helps set the pace of the story, showing us how fast the police arrived after the call.
Good observation, Lily. And finally, let's touch on the phrase, a mix of fear and relief. This shows the complex emotions the character feels, combining two opposite feelings into one. It's a great example of how language can convey nuanced emotions.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up this episode, let's quickly summarize what we've covered. We explored some powerful verbs like leaped, smashed, and fumbled, as well as useful phrases like managed to and within minutes. We also looked at how the language in this part of the story helps build tension and convey emotion.
That's right. And these are the kinds of details that can really enrich your understanding of English. The more you notice them, the better you'll become at using them in your own speaking and writing.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the story and learned something new along the way. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to Storytelling with Lily and Brad for more episodes where we mix great stories with language learning.
And if you have any questions or vocabulary you want us to explain in future episodes, send them our way. We love hearing from our listeners.
Until next time, keep reading, keep learning, and keep enjoying the journey of mastering English.
Bye for now.